You know, yesterday, Rob, we talked on this show about X-Men Dark Phoenix and that it opened disastrously low. It's the critic rating for it opened was disastrously low, which, not surprising, they held off the review embargo until the day before the movie came out, so we all knew that was a big red flag. Good news for X-Men Dark Phoenix. Since it debuted on Rotten Tomatoes at 18%, it has gone all the way up to 22%, ladies and gentlemen. 22% that X-Men Dark Phoenix now sits at. However, even at that heightened 22%, it is now official. X-Men Dark Phoenix is the worst rated X-Men film of all time. Joining the likes of the fifth worst, which is, when you consider how many X-Men films, this isn't bad. The fifth worst is the Wolverine at 71%. The fourth worst was X-Men The Last Stand at 57%. Third worst was X-Men Apocalypse at 47%. And the worst, before X-Men Dark Phoenix came out, was X-Men Origins Wolverine, not surprising, at 37%, and then a massive drop down to that. Now we have X-Men Dark Phoenix at 22%. Now, we talked yesterday on this show, Rob, about, that this is a disastrous coming out for it. It's a final film. But what really jumped out to me and what I wanted to ask you about is when you look at a franchise like the X-Men franchise, that producers like the Dark Knight producer and producers like Kevin Feige and other producers in Hollywood, they credit the X-Men franchise, particularly that first X-Men film, with being the film that relaunched the superhero genre into this new golden age. It's the movie that made producers go, we can do comic book movies like this. When you're looking at a franchise that has had X-Men, X-Men 2, X-Men First Class, X-Men Days of Future Past, Deadpool, Deadpool 2, Logan, I mean, just absolutely stellar comic book movies. For it to go out on a note like this, for it to wrap up this era of X-Men films like this, and I gotta preface all this by saying I haven't seen the movie, so I've got my tickets for tonight. I'm going in about 6 hours. I'm gonna go watch the movie for myself tonight, whatever. But for it to go out as the worst of the bunch, according to critic ratings, at any rate, it really is a shame, because this is a franchise to me, Rob, that deserved to go out on a high note. It didn't have to be better than X-Men Days of Future Past, but you want it to go out on a high note, and it just doesn't. And I think that's a really, really unfortunate thing. And unfortunately, I think it's going to make it might color people's, vision of this franchise as they look back on it in years to come. And I'm afraid that instead of looking back at this franchise as truly the Godfather franchise that got the new golden age of comic book movies going, that got everybody convinced you can do these movies, that put out such excellent, fantastic fare, it's going to shade it a little bit, because maybe the first thing they're going to think about is X-Men Dark Phoenix. And maybe I'll love the movie. I haven't seen it yet myself, but I don't know, Rob, what kind of impact do you think this is going to have on the long-term legacy of the Fox X-Men franchise?
Well, it's sad to me because, the first X-Men was a budgetarily challenged film. It was about a $75
I love that phrase, budgetarily challenged.
It was budgetarily challenged. They didn't know. They didn't know if it was going to work. Lauren Shuler-Donner, the producer who owned the franchise, who bought the rights, did not like Brian's initial approach. As a matter of fact, she wasn't even at the Ellis Island premiere. She went out of town because she was terrified the movie was going to tank. Wow. And I think what this franchise really needs is you need directorial vision. You need somebody, look, Brian was coming off of Usual Suspects and Apt Pupil. You had people like James Mangold come in and do the Wolverine, and then again Logan. James Mangold is a guy, writer-director.
And now he's doing Ford v Ferrari?
Yeah, and I think then what happens is they panicked because Brian was going to do Superman Returns, and they hired Brett Ratner to come in and do The Last Stand. At the time, Brett Ratner was, a journeyman studio director that they could just throw at any movie. What they needed was an auteur. And I think Simon Kinberg, look, I've never met Simon. By all accounts, he's a very nice guy. He's involved with a lot of franchises. He'd never directed a commercial, much less a $150 million movie. Now, I understand in Hollywood you parlay your relationships, but he had no business directing that movie. They're hard. Movies are hard enough to. They're hard enough to make indie movies, but your first time out of the gate is a $150 million franchise property that you'd already written a script that was compromised with X-Men Last Stand that covered the Dark Phoenix saga, sort of, and then you come in and you handle not just the most beloved story in X-Men history, arguably, but a movie that's the last of a franchise. It just seemed it was not a well-considered recipe for success. It was, you're rewarding somebody for a job well done, which is what Simon Kinberg was getting. He was leveraging his position. But look what we wound up with. And how much is that movie going to lose now? And where is Simon Kinberg's directing career now? I mean, it's a lose proposition all the way around. And it's Hollywood doing its worst. And it's sad because I love the X-Men franchise.
Yeah, and I love the X-Men franchise too. And, you know, I have questioned for a long time. And again, let me preface this. I haven't seen the movie yet. So I'm going to see it tonight. So everything I say, take with that grain of salt. But I have questioned for a long time because I'll tell you what, I am an unapologetic, unabashed Simon Kinberg fan. I have had the privilege of meeting the gentleman. I wouldn't say I don't know him, but I've met him on a couple of occasions. Super energetic, very like a really just a geek guy at heart.
Yep.
He has produced and written some great stuff. Not everything great, but what filmmaker has. But I have, from day one that they said he was going to be directing this, my big concern was I never liked the idea of getting a first-time director directing a big, huge budget, tentpole, recognizable IP film. I just think it's a recipe for disaster. And, you know, we were talking the other day, Rob, about the way that Lucasfilm and Disney are kind of managing Dave Filoni. Because, you know, for a long time, Star Wars fans have screamed for Dave Filoni to direct a Star Wars movie, to which I've always said, the guy's never directed anything with real actors. He's never directed a thing live action. So what did Disney do and Lucasfilm do? They're letting him cut his teeth on episodes of Mandalorian, and they're grooming him, and they're getting him ready for this. Now, the fortunate thing for Simon Kinberg is he's already lined up to direct that Jessica Chastain, Lupita Nyong'o film 355 that we talked about the other day. So let's hope that this X-Men fiasco doesn't derail that at this point, which it could, I suppose, but let's hope it doesn't do that because Jessica Chastain seems to believe in him. So that's all I need for right now. But again, I just worry that this will hurt the legacy of the X-Men franchise under Fox, which I think for the most part has been fantastic. And Simon Kinberg's had a hand in that. And I really just hope it doesn't affect it too awful much moving forward. Anyway, that's my thoughts on that. Hey, listen, guys, what do you think about this whole thing about X-Men, Dark Phoenix now being the lowest rated of all the X-Men films? Do you guys think this is going to hurt the legacy of the X-Men franchise as future generations look back? Or do you think, no, don't worry about it, John. The legacy's perfectly fine. They had too many great movies. Everything's going to be okay. Jump down in the comment section below and let me know your thoughts.